Hello. In this lesson, we'll be factoring using three different methods: factoring by grouping, factoring a sum of cubes, and factoring a difference of cubes. Recall that the reason we learn how to factor is to be able to find the roots, the zeros, or the solutions to an equation. And if you look at the first problem, number 15, notice how there are four terms. When you see four terms, most often you're going to be able to factor using the grouping technique. So let's go ahead and do that. The first step in grouping is to separate this into two groups. The second step is to factor out the monomial from each grouping. So in the grouping on the left, we have an x cubed plus 3x squared. The common monomial in that would be x squared. Then we need to write what's left over after we factor out that x squared. In this case, it's x plus 3. Going to the grouping on the right, the common monomial is going to be negative 9. Oftentimes, when you see a negative here at the beginning for the first term, you're going to want to factor out the negative number. So in this case, it's negative 9, and x plus 3 is left over. Another thing you notice right away is that x plus 3 is in both of these terms. That is, it's in the first term and the second term. When you do factoring by grouping, that always occurs if you're doing it correctly and it's factorable. So in this case, because we have an x plus 3 in both terms, we can go ahead and factor that x plus 3 out from both terms. We write that as x plus 3 times what's left over, which in this case is x squared minus 9. Now, the x plus 3 is factored all the way, but the x squared minus 9 isn't. In fact, it's a difference of two cubes. So we can rewrite the x squared minus 9 as x plus 3 times x minus 3. The x plus 3 in red is still part of the factorization, so now it's completely factored. On number 16, we have two perfect cubes. And let me go ahead and write down the formula for the sum of cubes. It takes the general form a cubed plus b cubed equals a, b, a squared, ab, b squared. Now notice I haven't written any signs in. That's because I wanted to talk about a trick or an acronym that may help you remember what those signs are. That acronym is SOAP. It tells you what the signs are based on the letter. So for example, the S stands for same, meaning in the first spacing here, we're going to have the same sign as our original problem. That's plus. Then for the next section here, we're going to have the opposite sign. And then for AP, that stands for always positive. All right, now that we have our formula, we just need to figure out what A and B are, substitute them in, and we'll be done. One way to think about how to find your A and your B is that ultimately you're finding the cube root to figure out what your A is and the cube root to figure out what your B is. Stated another way, you're asking yourself, what could I cube to give me 27x to the third power? And that answer is 3x. What could I cube to give me 125? That answer is 5. So A is 3x and B is 5. If I substitute those into the formula, I'm going to have 3x plus 5 times, you got to be careful here, it's 3x and that whole quantity squared minus 3x times 5 plus 5 squared. Now we're not entirely done. We want to square the 3x, we want to multiply the negative 3 and the 5, and we want to square 5 before we write the final answer. So, final answer, 3x plus 5 times 9x squared minus 15x plus 25. On number 17, we have a difference of perfect cubes. But before we begin, I want to mention something you should always remember to do when you are factoring. Even if it's a factoring by grouping, you want to always try to find the GCF, the greatest common factor. In this case, there is one. You can factor out an 8 from both of these terms. When you do that, you get 8 times the quantity 8, p to the third power, minus r cubed. That 8 in the front is never going to go away. In fact, I'm just going to write it over here. That's going to be part of the solution. Then we want to look at what's in parentheses and apply the difference of cube formula. I'm going to go ahead and write that out. It's a cubed minus b cubed equals ab times a squared, ab, b squared. Now, notice again, I didn't write in the signs. That's because we can again apply SOAP to remember what those signs are. Same would be negative here, opposite would be a plus sign there, and always plus would be a plus at the end, plus b squared. Looking at what's in parentheses and trying to figure out our a and our b, one thing I want to mention is that oftentimes students might write something like 8p as their a here. But in reality, if you took 8 to the third power, you wouldn't get an 8 back. You want to end up with 8p to the third power when you cube a. So in this case, a is 2p. b is r. Substituting those in to the formula, we're going to get 2p minus r times 2p quantity squared plus 2p times r plus r squared. Writing the final answer, it's going to be 2p minus r. Now I'm going to square 2p, which gives me 4p squared, plus 2pr plus r squared.